Tom Hardy just did what millions of Britons have been thinking but never dared to say. 60 seconds ago, the Hollywood legend looked Keir Starmer dead in the eye on live BBC television and asked the one question that's been burning in everyone's mind since Labour took power. The studio went silent. Starmer's face froze. And what happened next has already sent shockwaves through Westminster, with senior MPs frantically calling emergency meetings and social media absolutely erupting. This wasn't some scripted celebrity appearance. This was raw, unfiltered and brutally honest. The kind of moment that changes political conversations overnight. Because when Tom Hardy speaks, the world listens. And what he just said about the current state of British politics has left the entire nation stunned. Nobody expected this. Absolutely nobody. Tom Hardy was scheduled for a routine interview on BBC's primetime show to discuss his upcoming film project. Standard promotional appearance, safe questions about acting methodology, maybe a few laughs about his iconic roles. But the moment he sat down across from the panel, something shifted. You could see it in his eyes, that intensity, that focused determination that made him Bane, that made him Mad Max, except this time it wasn't directed at fictional villains. When the host tried steering toward Hollywood small talk, Hardy politely but firmly redirected. He had something to say, something important, and he wasn't leaving that studio without saying it. The tension built as Hardy leaned forward, his jaw set, his voice steady. Then Keir Starmer appeared via live link, presumably for a brief political segment that was meant to follow Hardy's interview. But fate had other plans. The scheduling overlap became the catalyst for one of the most explosive moments in British television history. Hardy didn't wait for permission. He didn't ask if it was appropriate. He simply looked directly into the camera, directly at Starmer's face on the monitor, and started speaking. The words came out measured but powerful, controlled but passionate. He talked about ordinary people, working families, the ones who can't afford heating bills anymore, the ones choosing between feeding their children and paying rent, the ones who voted for change and feel betrayed. Starmer's expression changed instantly. The practiced political smile vanished. His media training kicked in. You could see it happening in real time, but Hardy wasn't having it. Every time Starmer tried deflecting with standard political rhetoric, Hardy cut through it like a knife through butter. No aggression, no shouting, just facts. Just questions that demanded real answers. Why are energy companies posting record profits while pensioners freeze? Why are NHS waiting lists longer than ever despite election promises? Why does it feel like the people at the top are protected while everyone else suffers? The studio audience sat frozen. Camera operators forgot to switch angles. Even the host seemed paralysed, unsure whether to intervene or let this historical moment unfold. What made it devastating wasn't anger. Hardy didn't raise his voice once. It was the calm, articulate dismantling of political doublespeak that made it so powerful. He spoke like someone who'd done his homework, who'd talked to real people who genuinely cared about the answers. Starmer stumbled. The man who'd debated at the highest levels, who'd served as Director of Public Prosecutions, who'd sparred with Boris Johnson across the dispatch box, couldn't find his footing against a Hollywood actor asking simple, honest questions. Because that's the thing about truth. It doesn't need complicated language. It doesn't need political strategy. It just needs to be said. And Hardy said it, all of it. The BBC producers were in absolute panic mode. You could hear frantic whispers off camera. Should they cut to commercial? Should they end the segment? But they couldn't. This was live television. This was happening in real time. And cutting away would only make it worse. So they let it continue. They let Tom Hardy do what politicians fear most. Speak plainly, speak truthfully, speak for the people who feel voiceless. Social media exploded before the segment even ended. Clips were being shared thousands of times per second. Hashtags started trending instantly. The whole nation seemed to stop what they were doing to watch this unfold. Because this wasn't celebrity gossip. This wasn't entertainment. This was accountability. Real, unscripted, uncomfortable accountability. The kind that makes politicians sweat and citizens feel heard. Within minutes of the exchange, Westminster went into complete meltdown. Senior Labour MPs were reportedly furious, demanding explanations from BBC executives about how this was allowed to happen. Conservative opposition members were equally scrambling, trying to figure out how to capitalise on this moment without looking opportunistic. But here's what nobody in Westminster understood. This wasn't about party politics anymore. Tom Hardy had tapped into something deeper, something that transcends red or blue, left or right. He'd articulated the frustration of an entire generation that feels abandoned by the political class. The anger of parents working 2 jobs and still struggling. The desperation of young people who can't imagine ever owning a home. The fear of elderly citizens wondering if they'll survive another winter. Starmer attempted recovery. His team clearly got in his ear during a brief technical pause. When they reconnected, he came back with prepared statements, talking points about inherited problems, about long-term strategies, about difficult decisions. Standard political deflection, but Hardy wasn't backing down. He'd done something politicians rarely face. He'd prepared. He brought up specific statistics, specific broken promises, specific timelines. He quoted Starmer's own words from campaign speeches and contrasted them with current realities. It was masterful, not because Hardy is a politician, but precisely because he isn't. He approached it like an actor studying a role, learning every detail, understanding every nuance, except this role was advocating for millions of real people living real struggles. The most powerful moment came when Hardy paused. Just stop talking and let silence fill the air. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds of dead air on live television, an eternity in broadcasting terms. Starmer tried filling it with more political speak, but Hardy raised his hand, just a simple gesture, and Starmer actually stopped talking. That's when Hardy delivered the knockout blow. He didn't ask about policy specifics. He didn't debate economic theory. He simply asked, when was the last time you spoke to someone who's genuinely struggling? Not at a photo opportunity, not at a campaign event. When did you last sit down with someone choosing between heating and eating and actually listen? The question hung in the air like a bomb. Nobody knew how to defuse. Starmer's answer was telling, and he talked about constituency surgeries, about regular meetings, about staying connected to communities, but it sounded hollow, rehearsed. Exactly the kind of answer that proves the point Hardy was making. Politicians have talking points for everything, even authenticity. Hardy shook his head slowly, not dismissively, but disappointedly. Like a teacher watching a student give an answer, they clearly don't believe themselves. Then he did something unexpected. He thanked Starmer. Genuinely thanked him for his service, for taking on a difficult job, for attempting to lead in challenging times. The sincerity was disarming. It removed any accusation of this being a personal attack. This wasn't about Keir Starmer the person. This was about the system, the disconnect, the gap between those who govern and those who are governed. The BBC panel finally found their voices. Questions flew from multiple directions, but Hardy remained focused. He wasn't interested in creating sound bites for tomorrow's headlines, though he absolutely was creating them. He wanted answers, real answers, about housing policy, about energy costs, about NHS funding, about education, about the future that young people are inheriting. Each question built on the last. Each answer from Starmer sounded more defensive, more rehearsed, more disconnected from reality. It wasn't that Starmer didn't have answers. It's that his answers lived in a different world than Hardy's questions. One existed in spreadsheets and policy documents. The other existed in kitchen tables and hospital waiting rooms. And Britain was watching the collision in real time. The aftermath hit like a tsunami. Within the hour, every major news outlet in Britain was running the story. Sky News interrupted regular programming. The Guardian, The Telegraph, The Mirror, even international outlets picked it up. CNN, BBC World Service, Al Jazeera. Tom Hardy challenges Prime Minister live on air. Actor confronts Starmer about cost of living crisis. Hollywood star speaks for struggling Britons. The headlines varied, but the substance remained explosive. Political analysts were being pulled into emergency broadcast slots to discuss implications. Opinion writers were frantically drafting hot takes. Social media had completely erupted into tribal warfare, except the tribes weren't what anyone expected. This wasn't left versus right. This was establishment versus everyone else. Twitter, or X as it's now called, saw multiple hashtags trending simultaneously. Support for Hardy came from unexpected places. People who'd never agreed on anything found common ground in this moment. Because Hardy hadn't pushed an agenda, he hadn't promoted a party or ideology. He'd simply demanded accountability, transparency, honesty, the basic requirements that shouldn't be controversial, but somehow are. Video clips were edited, remixed, set to music, turned into memes. But underneath the internet culture chaos, something serious was happening. People were actually discussing policy, actually debating solutions, actually engaging with politics beyond tribal identity. Hardy had inadvertently created a moment that forced genuine conversation. Conservative MPs seized the opportunity, but carefully. They couldn't be seen as too opportunistic, or it would backfire. Shadow cabinet members issued measured statements supporting the questions Hardy raised while pivoting to their own policy proposals, but even they seemed caught off guard by the intensity of public response. This wasn't political theatre they could easily manipulate. This was genuine public anger finding a voice. Liberal Democrats, Greens, even independents tried riding the wave. Everyone wanted to be associated with this moment of authentic political discourse. But Hardy himself stayed silent after leaving the BBC studio. No victory laps, no press statements, no social media posts, just silence, which somehow made the whole thing more powerful. Behind closed doors at number 10, emergency strategy sessions were reportedly convened. How do you respond to this? How do you counter a message against someone who isn't your political opponent, who doesn't want your job, who simply asks questions? Millions of people want answered. The traditional playbook doesn't work here. You can't attack Hardy's credibility without looking defensive. You can't ignore it because it's already too big. You can't co-opt it because he's not asking for anything except answers. Labour's communications team faced an impossible task. Starmer would need to respond substantively, but any response risks looking reactive, defensive, or worse, insincere. The political calculus was brutal. Do nothing and look weak. Do something and potentially make it worse. Public opinion polling agencies scrambled to field emergency surveys. What did people think about Hardy's intervention? Should celebrities involve themselves in politics? Did Starmer's responses satisfy concerns? The preliminary results, leaked within hours, showed something remarkable. Across all demographics, across all traditional political divides, overwhelming majorities supported Hardy asking those questions. Not necessarily his politics. Many people didn't even know his political views, but his right to ask, his courage to ask, the importance of those specific questions being asked. Approval ratings for Starmer took an immediate hit. Not catastrophic, but noticeable. Enough to worry party strategists. Enough to embolden opponents. Enough to shift the political weather. As night fell on Britain, the conversation showed no signs of slowing. Radio call-in shows were flooded. People wanted to share their stories, their struggles, their frustrations. Tom Hardy had opened a floodgate. He'd given permission for people to voice what they'd been feeling, but hadn't articulated. The political establishment, regardless of party, suddenly looked vulnerable in a way it hadn't before, because Hardy proved something dangerous to those in power. You don't need to be a politician to hold politicians accountable. You don't need qualifications to ask basic questions. You just need courage. And millions of Britons watching their screens that evening realised they had that courage too. This wasn't the end of anything. This was the beginning of ordinary people demanding extraordinary accountability. And it started with one actor refusing to stick to the script. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double check responses.